Hi, I'm Raina. My sister used to call me the failure of the family, the quiet one who never made it. Last week, she laughed in front of her coworkers and said, "This is my jobless sister, probably here for a file review job, $50 an hour." They all laughed with her, but what none of them knew was that the firm she was mocking me in was the one I built. 2 minutes later, her boss walked out, hugged me, and said, "Everyone, meet our founder." And just like that, the room froze. But that moment was only the beginning of what they'd stolen, and what I came back to take back. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening, and where are you tuning from? Drop a comment below. Because this story, it's not just about revenge, it's about finally being seen. The first thing I noticed was the windows, tall and spotless, stretching up to a ceiling too high for casual comfort, like they were built to remind people just how small they were in the grand scheme of power. That kind of window didn't belong in a law office. It belonged in a museum or a penthouse. But then again, this wasn't just any law office. This was Maris's firm. I stood outside for a moment longer than I needed to. My hand clutched the paper cup of coffee I'd bought earlier that morning, now lukewarm and stale. I should have tossed it, but part of me wanted something to hold, something grounding. Inside, laughter floated through the glass as sharply as the click of heels on marble. I stepped through the doors, and just like that, I was back in her world. Maris, my older sister, always knew how to take up space. From childhood, she'd been the golden one. She had a shine about her, even when she was cruel. Our parents clung to her achievements like they were their own, parading her trophies and scholarships like family heirlooms. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the one who colored outside the lines, then got told not to touch the crayons again. Seattle had changed since I last lived here, or maybe I had. Years spent consulting across borders, building systems in silence, staying off the radar. It all shaped me differently. But today, I wasn't here for nostalgia. At the welcome table, a young receptionist barely looked up before slapping a badge onto the counter. "Visitor, Rena Vale," it read. I blinked. My name isn't Rena, and it's definitely not spelled Vale. It was a small thing, but I've learned small things can be sharp when they cut deep enough. Maris approached from the left, impeccably dressed, her platinum blonde hair in a knot that probably took 3 products and 20 minutes. She glanced at the badge and let out a soft, polished laugh. "Oh, that's fine. She's not really with the firm." Her voice was casual, like she was commenting on the weather. Marcus, her husband, slid in right behind her. "She's probably here begging for a job," he said, with a grin, the kind that shows too many teeth for comfort. Laughter echoed around the front desk. Not loud, not mean. Just enough to sting. I didn't blink. "I'm just visiting." Inside, my heart hammered like a fist against a locked door. But my face? My face didn't move. That was the thing about silence. When used right, it can feel louder than anything they throw at you. Maris motioned toward a small round table shoved against a wall near the restrooms. "You can sit there. I'll bring you a croissant." I didn't bother declining. The table wobbled when I touched it, legs uneven. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and overripe bananas. A server brushed past me and muttered a quick, "Sorry," barely noticing he'd knocked my elbow. Across the room, the partners sat at the main table, sunlight dancing off crystal glasses and the occasional flicker of a Rolex. The walls were lined with awards, plaques, certificates, all bearing one name more than any other: Marcus Hale, managing partner. I scanned them quietly, not out of jealousy, just recognition. 10 years ago, I helped shape the first draft of this firm's internal model. Nights spent reviewing contracts while everyone else slept. I never asked for credit, then. I just assumed they'd remember. They didn't. The bistro hummed with conversation. Someone popped a champagne cork and laughed too loud. I sat straighter, pretending to check something on my phone. This was exactly like family dinners growing up. Me at the far end, always the listener, never the asked, always the one who brought her own chair. A memory surfaced, uninvited but sharp. 10 years ago, when I'd first told them I was launching my own consulting firm, Maris had sipped her wine and said, "Oh, so it's like a hobby?" Marcus smirked. "You're just trying to copy us." They didn't laugh then. They didn't have to. Their tone said everything. Now here we were again. Same tone, different backdrop. Only I wasn't the same. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was just watching, closely. I reached into my bag and pulled out my silver pen. It was smooth, heavy, engraved with my initials, RV. A gift from myself the day I landed my first solo client. Marcus noticed and pointed. "You still carry that thing? What for? Signing cafe receipts?" I set it down gently beside my cold coffee. "I like things that last," I said. He scoffed and turned back to the table. My phone buzzed once. I glanced at it. "Mr. Gerald confirmed. You're all set for Monday's announcement." My eyes lifted slowly, not angry, not smug, just ready. Monday came with the same gray sky Seattle always offered, but I was different now. No brunch table, no forced croissant, no thin smiles. I held the manila folder against my side. A simple errand. That's all anyone needed to think. Inside my leather folder, my silver pen rested like a quiet sentinel. The same one Marcus mocked days ago. I remembered his smirk when he asked if I still used it to sign cafe receipts. That smirk would fade soon enough. I stepped through the revolving doors of Patterson and Vale, again, but not as the invisible sister or the tag-along guest. Today, I walked in with purpose. My sneakers squeaked slightly against the polished marble floors. I didn't bother dressing up. Jeans, a clean sweatshirt, no makeup, just me. Eden sat behind the reception desk, head slightly down, typing nervously. She looked up and saw me. Her shoulders tightened. I could see the thought forming behind her eyes. Should I greet her? Warn someone? Pretend not to notice? Before she could decide, the air shifted. "Look who we have here." Marcus's voice carried across the lobby like he was announcing the lunch special. 3 junior associates flanked him, young and eager to mirror his every chuckle. "She's probably here begging for a job," he said, half laughing, half daring me to bite back. "That's my wife's sister, everyone. Been doing odd jobs for what, 5 years now?" Laughter. The polite kind that's worse than outright cruelty. The kind people use when they know you're not supposed to matter. I walked up to the counter and placed the folder down gently. My left hand rested over it, firm. Inside my jacket pocket, I curled my fingers around the silver pen. Steady. Stay steady. Marcus leaned against the counter like he owned the ground beneath our feet. "We might have something for her, actually," he continued. "File review. Nothing fancy. $50 an hour isn't terrible, right?" The young associate to his right gave a tight smile. The one on his left nodded like he didn't want to seem cold. Eden looked between them all, visibly pale. "Mr. Hale," she whispered, "maybe we should—" "It's fine, Eden," I cut in gently. My voice was even. "He's family." That word, family, landed heavier than I expected. I turned to face Marcus, letting the silence stretch just enough. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I already have a position." Marcus grinned like he'd been waiting for that. "Doing what? Freelance legal advice from coffee shops?" "Something like that," I said. That threw him. Just for a second, but I caught it. That flicker of confusion, like a man hearing footsteps in what he thought was an empty house. "Well," he said, voice recovering, "maybe we'll make you official. Patterson and Vale always needs temps." Eden's phone buzzed on the desk. She jumped, her eyes locked on the elevator screen above the lobby. An alert blinked. Partner Gerald. Thompson. Arrival confirmed. She started typing fast, fingers trembling over the keyboard. Mr. Hale, she tried again, this time more urgent. We should probably... Marcus waved her off. Eden, relax. My sister-in-law can handle a few jokes. I didn't say anything, didn't need to. My reflection in the lobby glass showed them all behind me, men in tailored suits, laughing. A scene from the past. But today, I wasn't the punchline. Today, I was the echo before the thunder. The elevator chimed, soft, clean, decisive. Eden froze. Marcus, still mid-story, didn't even glance behind. Footsteps approached, measured, sure. A voice followed. Marcus Hale, the voice said, calm, deep, with the kind of authority you don't argue with. Are you done entertaining my co-founder's sister? The lobby fell silent. Marcus turned. His smirk twitched. I turned too, slowly. Gerald Thompson stood there in a navy suit, tie slightly loosened like he had nothing left to prove. He looked at me and smiled. Everyone, he said, meet our founder. For a brief second, no one moved. It was like the whole room had forgotten how to breathe. The elevator was still open behind Gerald, his presence holding the air taut. He stepped out fully now, his voice calm but cutting through the hush. Everyone, meet Raina Vale, Patterson and Vale's original founder. I watched the moment land, like a pebble dropped into still water. The surface cracked, the echo spread fast. The only sound in the room was the faint hiss of the espresso machine behind the reception desk. Even the jazz playing overhead had seemed to vanish. Marcus's usual grin twitched, half-formed and hanging in place. Maris had her phone in one hand, frozen mid-scroll. I could see the screen reflected in the glass behind her. Her email inbox open, unread, irrelevant now. I didn't make a scene. I didn't try to stretch the moment. Good morning, I said. And just like that, the room cracked open. Gerald walked forward and took my hand. No hesitation, no pretense. His grip was firm, steady, the kind that says, I see you and I remember. Raina, he said with a warm smile, we've missed your presence here. Then he turned, addressing the crowd still frozen in polite disbelief. I believe some introductions were inaccurate. I didn't need to look around to know how many mouths were still open. Maris broke the silence, her voice just a little too loud. Wait, what? I thought you'd left the firm, years ago. I did, I said simply, after building the original client network and branding the name. But as you know, the legal documents don't lie. My name's still there. Always has been. Marcus scoffed. Come on, Raina. Names on paper don't mean much unless you're still involved. Gerald didn't even flinch. Actually, they mean everything, especially when the original partnership agreement was never formally dissolved. He tilted his head toward Marcus. You've been operating under assumed authority. I trust you've read the agreement recently? Marcus blinked. I assumed Maris handled that. Maris turned sharply. Excuse me? You were the one... You both knew, I said, quiet, steady. You just didn't expect me to come back. My words hung there, heavier than anything else said that morning. I didn't raise my voice, didn't roll out some dramatic speech. Instead, I reached into my folder, unfolded a single sheet of paper, and laid it gently on the reception counter. The document was clean, official, freshly notarized. I could hear Eden's breath hitch as she leaned forward to glance at it. Raina Vale retains 35% ownership of Patterson and Vale's intellectual property, brand identity, and original client infrastructure. Silence again. This time, different, denser. The junior associates who had laughed at Marcus's jokes now looked down at their shoes. Even Marcus, who usually filled every inch of a room with his voice, stood there blinking, wordless. I could feel my heartbeat, not out of fear, but something steadier, like balance returning to a room that had tilted for too long. Eden glanced at me. Her lips pressed into a line, something almost like gratitude in her eyes. I didn't need her to say anything. The stillness in that space said more than applause ever could. Maris finally spoke, her voice lower, less sure. "You didn't say you were coming back?" "I wasn't planning to," I admitted. But when I saw the firm still using my branding, my network, it felt unfinished. Her expression sharpened. "You could have just picked up the phone." "I did, twice." My tone didn't change, but the impact landed. Marcus shifted from foot to foot, clearing his throat. That old performance tic. I'd seen it before, when we were younger, and he'd get caught exaggerating his resume to clients. Maris's face hardened, but I saw the flicker, regret, or maybe just exposure. "So what now?" she asked. "You want money? Credit?" "No," I replied. "Just acknowledgement and honesty, that's all." Gerald stepped beside me, his presence a quiet shield. I could see it in the way the others looked at him. They wouldn't challenge his word. Not here. "I think it's best we review the standing structure of this firm," he said evenly. "There are clearly gaps in how things have been managed." As he spoke, I turned slightly, my eyes drifting back to the reception counter. My silver pen, still there beside my cold coffee cup. I walked over slowly, picked it up, and tucked it into the folder. "Funny how things find their way home," I said under my breath. Behind me, I heard Marcus exhale, like a man who'd been holding in the truth so long it soured inside him. Gerald placed a hand on my shoulder, guiding me gently toward the hallway. As we walked, I didn't look back. When we reached his office, he opened the door for me, then closed it behind us. The click echoed like a period at the end of a long, unfinished sentence. He turned to face me. "Raina," he said, his eyes steady, "I think it's time we talk about what really happened 8 years ago." Gerald didn't say anything at first. He just opened the folder and slid it across the desk toward me, his hand withdrawing like he was handing over something toxic. I looked down, a standard manila file, but the weight of it was unmistakable. My name was printed across the top, my full name in bold. Inside, a stack of documents, 8 years old but crisp. I didn't touch them right away. My eyes caught on the signature line of the first page. My own signature, except it wasn't mine, not exactly. I stared at the curves and strokes. Whoever did this had practiced. It was almost perfect. Almost. "Gerald," I said, my voice measured, "where did you get this?" "Internal audit flagged it last quarter," he replied. "It was buried under a budget request for the Ethos project. Something about licensing the name." I exhaled through my nose, steadying the flood building behind my ribs. "So," I said, "not only was I erased, someone forged my approval to keep using my work." He nodded, solemn. "I wanted you to see it first, before we go to the board." The smell of cedar polish and old paper filled the silence between us. I let it hang there for a beat too long before speaking again. "You know," I said, "this office still smells exactly the same, like nothing ever changed." His face softened with something between regret and guilt. "But you did." I leaned back, letting the wood of the chair press into my spine. "Yeah, I had to." 8 years ago, I had walked into this same office, hopeful. Dressed in a navy blazer I bought on credit, a folder under my arm, and an idea I believed in like it was my firstborn child, the Ethos Network. That was the pitch. I remember standing by that same window, gesturing like a rookie TED speaker. "We'll connect pro bono legal services with underserved communities nationwide. Not charity, infrastructure, long-term partnerships. Gerald had listened, chin in hand, intrigued. Maris had sat beside him, all sharp lipstick and crossed legs, pretending to take notes. Marcus had flipped through the pages with one hand and scrolled his phone with the other. After the meeting, I stayed behind to tidy up. I left a copy of the pitch in Gerald's inbox and stepped out quietly. Just as the door latched behind me, I heard it. "She's good at dreaming," Maris had said, her voice almost admiring. Almost. "Maybe we'll just rework it, brand it differently." And then Marcus, "Yeah, clean it up, make it ours. She doesn't need credit. She'll thank us later." That night, I cried in my car in the parking garage, not because they stole from me, but because they didn't think I'd notice. Back in the present, Gerald cleared his throat. "I should have stopped them," he said. "I should have said something." "You didn't," I said plainly. He winced. "They claimed you wanted space, that you were going through things." My eyes snapped to his. They said, I was unstable. His silence was the answer. "I never left because of a breakdown," I said. "I left because I was pushed, doors locked, files restricted, my email disabled without notice." I pressed a finger to the folder. "And now you give me this? After 8 years?" Gerald leaned forward, earnest. "I thought you'd moved on. Europe, new life, new business." "My number never changed," I said. "My email never bounced. You didn't reach out. You just let it happen." He nodded slowly. "You're right." There was something raw in his eyes. Maybe remorse, maybe weariness. I couldn't tell. "But I want to make it right," he added. "If you're willing." I closed the folder gently. The forged signature glared at me like a scar. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about setting the record straight. For me, for what I built, for the people Ethos was supposed to help." Gerald nodded. "We'll call an emergency session. You'll speak. I'll back you." I stood, silver pen in hand, gripping it with more strength than I meant to. I'd used this pen to sign our first contract. Now, it felt like a reminder of everything they thought I'd forget. I glanced around the office one last time. The desk, the credenza, even the framed quote on the wall that once inspired me. "Justice, though delayed, must never be denied." "I'm not here to burn it all down," I said, voice low but steady. "I'm here to reclaim what's mine." He looked at me with something resembling pride. "Then let's start there." I nodded once, tucking the folder under my arm. But just as I reached the door, Gerald called out, "There's more, Raina." I paused. He walked over, unlocked a cabinet, and pulled out another folder, thinner, yellowed at the edges. He opened it and held up a page. It was another document. Also bearing my name, also signed. Except this time, it wasn't just about intellectual property. "This," he said quietly, "is a payment authorization to a third-party shell account, done in your name, for firm funds. Almost $250,000. My body went cold. "That signature," he added, "matches the one on the Ethos release forms." I stared at the page, breath catching. "You think they used me to embezzle?" "I don't think," he replied, solemn. "I know." He placed the page on the desk, and suddenly the betrayal wasn't just about erasure. It was about framing. They hadn't just wanted me out. They'd needed me to disappear. And for a while, they got what they wanted. But the thing about ghosts, they never really leave. They watch. They wait. I sat in Gerald's office, the manila folder in front of me. It felt too heavy for what it was. Paper doesn't weigh much. But truth? That's something else entirely. Gerald sat quietly across from me, his elbows resting on the desk he once proudly had me sign our first agreement on. He nodded toward the file. "That's what came in from the audit team. They flagged it during the 2018-2019 cycle." I opened it. Inside were documents, contracts, licensing forms, partnership letters, client billing sheets. Every single one had my name at the bottom. My full name, my signature. Except, I never signed a single one of them. I leaned in, inspecting the strokes. The slant was right, the shape familiar, but I've been writing my name since I was 5. I know when it's mine and when it's not. They forged me, I said quietly. Gerald gave a small nod, lips pressed into a thin line. Digital signatures, stylus enhanced. Someone studied your writing. The page edges were clean, date stamps aligned perfectly. Too perfectly. Most were marked weeks, even months, after I'd stepped away from the firm. After they'd claimed I'd had a mental break. After they shut down my access and moved on without me. I flipped to the third document, an internal memo to the board. Approval for strategic brand licensing, signed by Marcus and Maris. My name sat between theirs like an anchor. Co-creator, R. Vale. That signature, I said, tapping it lightly with my nail, is almost perfect. Gerald didn't answer right away. Then, Maris took over documentation approvals after you left. Marcus managed expansion. I had oversight, but I didn't catch it. Not then. I stared at him. But you knew. He didn't flinch. Last year, yes. Once the ethos audit raised flags, I started going backward. Every forged document tied to shell accounts, consulting subcontracts, LLCs I'd never even heard of. Hale and Vale Consulting, I muttered. I saw it on the brand filings. He looked startled. You've been looking? I closed the folder. Gerald, I never stopped. Later that night, after driving home in silence, I sat at my desk in my small home office. The Seattle skyline blinked in the distance, like a tired city trying to stay awake. I pulled the curtains halfway closed and turned on my desk lamp. Then I laid out every document Gerald had given me, arranging them like puzzle pieces. My name repeated again and again, like graffiti on walls I never walked past. Beside them, I opened my cloud archive. I keep everything: drafts, memos, old files no one thought I'd still have. On the left, my originals, timestamps, notes in the margins. My writing, not just my signature. On the right, the forgeries, identical in format, cold, efficient. But the soul was missing. A lawyer can spot the difference. So can a woman who's had to rebuild herself from ashes. Line by line, I highlighted changes. A contract for a community education initiative had been rewritten as a private consultancy for a real estate developer. A nonprofit funding agreement had been rerouted through Hale and Vale's private accounts, ones that now existed in Delaware and Nevada under shell names. Page after page, betrayal unfolded. I reached for my phone, needing air. But instead, a message blinked onto the screen before I could unlock it. You shouldn't dig into old wounds, Raina. No name, just clean, cold punctuation. No one but Maris wrote like that. Sharp, formal, perfect to the point of being surgical. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened my encrypted email, drafted a message, addressed it to Lila Tran, a former law intern I'd mentored 10 years ago. She'd since become an investigative journalist with a strong spine and a nose for rot. I attached every forged document, every real one. Then I wrote, simply, Lila, if anything happens to me, publish everything. The real story, the real names. You'll know what to do. I hit send. Then I shut my laptop, letting the screen fade to black. And in the dark reflection, I saw myself. Older, sharper. A woman who used to shrink to keep the peace, and finally decided she didn't owe anyone her silence. They wanted me invisible, I whispered. Let's see how they handle visible. I stood and moved toward the kitchen, needing water, something to calm the heat rising in my chest. Just as I passed the hallway light, A knock came, soft but deliberate. I froze. It was late. Too late for visitors. I approached the door, checking the peephole. A courier stood there, dressed in dark gray, envelope in hand. I opened the door slowly. "Miss Vale?" he asked, glancing at the address. "You need to sign for this." I took the pen he offered and signed without blinking. The envelope was thick, sealed, gold-embossed letterhead. Across the front, "Cease and desist." Not even 48 hours since I walked into that brunch. And the war had already begun. The courier didn't say a word, just turned, coat collar high against the cold night drizzle, and walked off my porch as if he couldn't leave fast enough. I closed the door behind me and stood there for a long moment, the envelope still in my hand, thick and stiff like something meant to bruise. The seal was official. Patterson and Vale Legal, confidential communication. I didn't flinch, not anymore. Fear had already served its time in my life. What I felt now wasn't fear. It was focus, cool and sharp as glass. I sat down at the dining table, drew my silver pen, and slit the flap. Inside were 4 pages of carefully worded intimidation. They accused me of unauthorized access to firm property, of violating non-compete clauses, of engaging in slanderous activities. Every sentence was wrapped in the kind of legal language that's less about truth and more about shutting someone up. At the bottom of the final page was her signature, Maris Vale, managing partner, and just below, scribbled in blue ink, not typed, just 5 smug little words. "Should have stayed quiet, sis." I smiled. The next morning, rain tapped against my windshield as I parked outside Patterson and Vale. I got there before the sky turned gray, before the city stirred. The kind of silence you only hear before a storm breaks. Inside the lobby, the floors gleamed and the air smelled like fresh polish and filtered coffee. Eden looked up, startled. "Miss Vale, I didn't expect—" "It's okay," I said gently. "Could you let Mr. Thompson know I'm here?" She nodded and picked up the phone. 5 minutes later, Gerald appeared, looking like he hadn't slept. "You shouldn't be here, Raina," he said under his breath. "She sent it, didn't she?" His eyes moved to the envelope in my hand. "She's scared." "She should be." He studied me for a beat longer, then gave a tight nod. "Come on, let's give you the room you've earned." The boardroom hadn't changed. Same glass walls, same long walnut table, same view of the city below, like a kingdom they thought they built alone. Maris was already there, seated at the far end, perfectly still, back straight, face unreadable. Marcus sat beside her, glancing down at his phone like he wished he were anywhere else. "Raina," she said coolly, "you've made things complicated." I didn't bother sitting. Honesty tends to do that. Gerald took his seat at the head. "We're here to clarify a few things. Raina's ownership rights still stand, and we have proof that documents bearing her name were forged." Maris tilted her head slightly. "Allegedly forged. Do you have confirmation from a forensic analyst?" I slid a small USB drive across the table. "It's all on there," I said. "Digital analysis, timestamp verification, handwriting forensic comparison, certified yesterday." Maris didn't move, but her eyes narrowed. Just a little. Marcus finally looked up. "Wait, what are we—" "Marcus, stop," she snapped, her tone sharper than I'd heard in years. That crack in her voice told me more than her face ever could. She was cornered, but she wasn't done. She leaned forward, voice low but charged. "You think you're exposing us? You're setting fire to your own legacy. You'll take this firm down with you." "My name's already been dragged through mud," I answered. "The only thing left to burn is the truth." Gerald raised a hand. "That's enough. The board will meet this week to review the evidence. Until then, I expect everyone to conduct themselves professionally." Maris stood abruptly. "You're siding with her now?" "I'm siding with facts," Gerald said without looking away. She turned her fury on me. "You'll regret this." I stood too. "I already did. 8 years ago, when I trusted you." Her nostrils flared. She looked like she wanted to say more, to lash out, but she didn't. She picked up her folder and walked out with Marcus trailing behind, eyes low. I stood there for another minute after they left. The room felt smaller now, or maybe I had just grown. By the time I got back to my car, the rain had thickened. The windows blurred with steady streaks as I sat behind the wheel. I should have felt vindicated, maybe even proud, but all I felt was tired, not weak tired, bone tired. The kind of weariness that comes from years of holding your tongue while people wrote over your story. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Lila. "The audit you sent me. It's trending. Someone leaked it." I looked up at the glass tower above me. Patterson and Vale's name shimmered on the building, the stormy sky casting it in metallic shadow. "Good," I whispered. "Let the truth make the noise for once." I sat there for another moment, rain still streaking down the windshield, the faint buzz of my phone next to me like a distant alarm I wasn't ready to answer. But I knew. Whatever came next, it had already left the shadows. By noon, my name was everywhere. I ducked into a cafe off Pine and Third to grab something warm, more out of habit than hunger. The place was buzzing. Screens mounted above the counter rolled through local and national headlines, and one caught my eye. Law firm founder erased from her own company. Below it, a photo of me, a grainy shot taken as I left the firm yesterday, and right next to it, my old graduation picture from Yale. I hadn't seen that image in years. I looked young, hopeful. Someone who believed the truth always found its way. The air in the cafe shifted. A man near the door muttered, "That's her. That's the one they tried to oust." A woman shook her head, arms folded. Her own sister. That's cold. I kept my sunglasses on and stared down at the lid of my coffee cup. I didn't say anything, but every word I heard landed heavy. Reminders that my life was no longer behind closed doors. It had become a public reckoning. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket, over and over. Gerald had left 3 messages, 2 unknown numbers, and 1 voicemail from Marcus. His voice, tight and hurried, spilled through my earpiece. "Raina, you need to fix this before it ruins us all. Please, there's still time to shut it down." I deleted it. Too late, Marcus. The truth was already loose, and it wasn't going back. That evening, just as the sky dipped into that Seattle twilight that makes the whole city look bruised, my phone lit up again, Maris. For a second, I debated letting it ring, but I answered. "You think you've won?" Her voice snapped through the line, sharp and trembling. "This wasn't a game," I replied. "It was about setting the record straight." "You humiliated me," she hissed. "You've destroyed everything I've built." "No," I said, calm but firm. "I exposed what you stole." There was silence on the other end, then a shaky breath. "You think anyone cares who started what? They care who's on top, and I still have clients. You don't." The desperation in her tone was louder than the words, and for a moment I actually felt a flicker of pity. "You can rebuild," I told her, "but only if you start telling the truth." She laughed, short, hollow. "You've always been jealous of me." That hit like a slap from the past, words we'd flung at each other in college arguments, words that never held truth, only venom. "No," I said softly, "I've just always been disappointed in you." And I ended the call. The next morning came with thunderclouds and worse headlines. "Disgraced founder misused funds before exit, sources claim." I froze. Maris had wasted, No time. She was already spinning the story, flipping the spotlight, framing me as the architect of the very corruption she orchestrated. Her PR machine was running full speed. Journalists swarmed my inbox. Every law blog from LA to New York suddenly had an inside source. Speculation turned to suspicion. Comment threads were brutal. I couldn't scroll for 5 seconds without seeing my name tied to words like fraud, scandal, cover-up. And then, one subject line from Gerald: "Hold steady. Audit report drops tomorrow. This ends then." But tomorrow felt far away. Too far. That night, I sat in my home office, fingers gripping the edge of my desk as I stared at the screen. Lies blinked back at me. Articles, comments, messages, all rewriting my story in real time. I felt myself unraveling, not into fear, but something colder. I wasn't ashamed, I was angry, not fiery, surgical. I closed my eyes and heard my father's voice, quiet and grounded. "Never argue in the mud, Raina. Let silence do the heavy lifting." So I opened my verified profile and typed, 8 years of silence doesn't erase the truth. Documents don't lie, people do. That was it. No hashtags, no rage, no explanation, just fact. Within an hour, it had passed 1 million views. Comments flooded in, some defending me, some condemning, others simply watching the chaos unfold. But I didn't respond, because for once, silence was working. Silence wasn't surrender. It was power. Later, I stepped into the kitchen for water, hoping for a moment of peace. That's when I noticed the silver pen again, resting beside my laptop, the one Maris gave me when we first opened the firm. Back then, it meant something: trust, future, family. Now it was a relic, a reminder that anything built on a lie eventually inked itself into ruin. My phone buzzed again. A message from Gerald. "Tomorrow, the board meets. Be ready, Raina. It's time for final reckoning." I looked out the window as the city lights flickered beneath the weight of the storm. Tomorrow was coming fast, and this time I wouldn't be erased. The next morning moved like muscle memory. Black slacks, clean blouse, hair pinned up. Nothing too sharp, nothing too soft. Just steady, purposeful. Seattle's gray sky hung low as I stepped out of the car and walked through the revolving doors of Patterson and Vail. The same floors, same marble, same sterile lighting. But everything felt different, like walking into a house that used to belong to you. The boardroom was already filling as I arrived. A swirl of hushed voices, clicks of pens, the tap, tap, tap of laptops. It still smelled the same: old wood, paper, and burnt coffee from the corner machine. But this time, I didn't walk in as a memory. I walked in as the founder. Gerald sat at the far end, quiet but firm, his presence already anchoring the room. Maris was directly across from him, impeccably dressed, unbothered on the surface, but her fingers tapped a beat I knew too well. She only did that when her control was slipping. Marcus hunched in his seat near the center of the table. Eyes down, sleeves tugged. Avoidance all over him. Gerald cleared his throat. "Let's begin." The board murmured assent, rustling papers and shifting in their chairs. Before I could say a word, Maris launched. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me start by saying these allegations are not only baseless, but deeply damaging. What my sister is doing..." I set a folder gently in front of me and spoke evenly. "Then you won't mind if I show them the truth." I connected my laptop to the projector and opened one file. A scanned licensing agreement appeared on the screen. I looked up, met the eyes of each board member. This is the original contract for the Ethos Network project, dated February 2nd, 2017. I clicked. Now here's what the firm submitted for audit. Same project, different version. 2 documents side by side, one signed by me. The other, my name forged with digital ink. The room stilled. I zoomed in on the signatures. Notice the pen pressure, the slant, the file metadata. Mine was signed at 10:12 a.m. on February 2nd. The forgery? Uploaded June 11th at 2:14 a.m. from Maris Vale's personal account. Gasps rippled through the room like sudden wind. Gerald leaned forward. Who authorized this revision? Maris didn't move at first, then softly, "It was a clerical update." I let the silence speak. "No," I said, "it was fraud." Her jaw clenched, shoulders rising, but the board had already turned. No more loyalty in their eyes, just confusion and suspicion. "Raina," Maris began again, but her voice cracked. "You don't understand the pressure, the deadlines. The board wanted results, and I just finished what you started." "By erasing me?" Her lip trembled, but she didn't cry. Not Maris. "You left, Raina." I held her gaze. "No, I was pushed. You told them I was unstable, that I needed to step back. You said I had a breakdown." She looked down, whispered, "You wouldn't have survived in this world." I drew in a breath. "You're right," I said. "Not in your version of it." The chair of the board, a woman named Dolores I'd once mentored, finally spoke. "Ms. Vale," she said, voice firm, "we have no choice but to suspend you pending a full investigation." Maris's head shot up. "You can't do this. This is my firm." "No," I said calmly. "It was ours, until you decided it wasn't." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Just silence. And it said everything. Gerald, quiet until now, slid a final document down the table toward her. A motion to transfer controlling shares back to the original founder. My name, clean, centered, final, sat across the top. Raina Vale. She stared at it like it burned. "This isn't over," she whispered. I smiled, not with triumph, but truth. "I hope not," I said, "because rebuilding takes longer than stealing." I stood, gathered my files, then turned to the board. "I'm not here to tear this place apart," I said. "I'm here to put it back together, the right way." They nodded, not in pity, not in awe, in agreement. Gerald raised his hand. "All in favor?" Hands lifted one by one, 8 out of 10. It was done. Maris sat frozen. Her reflection in the glass wall behind her was the only thing that moved, and for the first time it looked small, shrunken by the weight of truth. As I gathered my notes, a soft clink echoed. The silver pen rolled off the table, landed by my feet. I picked it up, turned it in my palm. The same one she gave me the day we signed our first lease. "Keep it," I said, voice soft. "You'll need it to sign your apology." She didn't answer. Didn't have to. I walked out into the hallway, past the lobby where interns whispered and staff turned their heads. Outside, the sky opened again. The Seattle rain poured in soft, steady sheets. But this time, it didn't feel like morning. It sounded like applause. But when I got home that evening, it was the stillness that stayed with me. No headlines, no lawyers, no voices echoing in hallways I once built from scratch. Just the hum of my refrigerator and the faint tick of the old wall clock, the one Dad gave me when I passed the bar. The one Maris always said looked too homemade for an executive. I left my bag on the kitchen stool and stood for a long moment in the living room, watching the shadows change as the sun disappeared behind the neighboring roofs. 3 days later, the firm released its statement. It wasn't flashy, no apologies, no public tears, just 4 clean lines. Following a full internal review, Raina Vale has been reinstated as founding partner of Patterson & Vale. The firm remains committed to transparency, integrity, and leadership. And that was it. I didn't expect an apology from them. I didn't need one. The truth, once buried, now lived in print. Permanent, undeniable. The inbox I'd ignored for days buzzed with messages. Some from colleagues I hadn't heard from in years, some from former clients, a few, too few, from those who'd once smiled at Maris while pushing me out. Even Marcus wrote, "You were right. She went too far. I should have said something sooner." I didn't respond. That morning, I sat by my office window, watching the light spill across the desk. That window once felt like prison glass, but today it felt like breath, like choice. Justice didn't come with celebration. It came with quiet, like standing in the rubble of a home and knowing you won't rebuild it. You'll just step away and leave the door unlocked for someone else. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I padded across the hardwood floor, barefoot, coffee mug in hand, and opened the door. Maris stood on the other side. No makeup, no stilettos. Just a simple coat, damp at the sleeves. She held a small white box, the cardboard soft from being gripped too tightly. "I wanted to return this," she said. Inside the box sat the silver pen, the one she gave me the day we signed the lease, the one that ended up rolling off that boardroom table like it knew its story wasn't finished. "It was yours from the start," she added. I took it, but said nothing. Her voice was steadier than I expected, but her hands trembled. "They're letting me resign quietly," she said. "No press, no photos." I nodded, still holding the pen. "I thought I'd hate you for all this," she continued, "but I don't. I hate that you were right." There was a flicker in her eyes, something raw, unfinished, maybe shame, maybe grief. I didn't reply right away. I let the silence sit between us. Familiar, weighted, honest. "You built everything on fear," I said softly. "You still can build something, just not the same way." She opened her mouth like she wanted to defend herself, but no words came, only one. Tear, quiet, sharp, and then another. She turned before I could say more and walked down the path, arms wrapped around herself. This time, I didn't stop her. That evening, I drove down to the waterfront, to the little cafe that overlooked the Sound. The same spot where I once wrote the first draft of Patterson and Vale's mission statement on a napkin. Seattle's skyline shimmered through a gentle haze. The rain had eased. The clouds were done crying. Across the table, Gerald sipped black coffee, his eyes on the horizon, like he was measuring the future. "You could take the firm back," he said. "Officially, the board would vote again in a heartbeat." "I could," I agreed, "but I won't." He studied me over his mug. "It's time for someone else to carry it," I said. "Someone without our last name. No ghosts in their pockets." Gerald nodded, then smiled. The kind that said he understood without needing the backstory. "So what's next?" he asked. "I'll teach," I told him. "Law students, ones who still believe you have to choose between success and a soul." He laughed. Warm, familiar. "They won't stand a chance." We raised our cups, not in a cheer, but in something steadier, something like a farewell. When the sun dipped low and cast the sky in orange and plum, we stood, and he squeezed my shoulder before walking toward his car. I lingered a moment longer. As I gathered my things, I noticed something tucked inside my notebook. A napkin, folded into the shape of a leaf. I stared at it, frozen. Maris used to fold those in the late hours at the firm. She never noticed she did it, a nervous habit when her mind was spinning faster than her mouth could keep up. I didn't know if she'd slipped it in, or if Gerald had, quietly reminding me that history is written not just in ink, but in gestures. I unfolded it slowly, letting the creases fall away. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to it. A space cleared, a door cracked open, a reminder that love and hurt often carry the same scent and the same handwriting. A few weeks later, I walked past the old firm tower. The signage had changed. Not bold, not grand. Just simple silver lettering on the stone facade. Vale Legal Group, no Patterson. No Maris, just Vale. I didn't stop to take a picture. I didn't even pause. I smiled, slipped my hands into my coat pockets, and kept walking. Justice didn't need applause. Only truth that refused to stay silent.